Hey guys, it's Seabro here. I wanted to talk about today something that's very important to every Overwatch team, and that is communication, or comms. In this video I'm going to emphasize a lot on comm structure in game, and I'll start by explaining how to reduce the amount that you need to communicate in game, and then I will look at every comm role, who in your team should do it, and how you can improve. I will then round off by talking about how you can implement this into your Overwatch team. Reducing the amount of communication necessary. Okay, so first up, there are things you want your team to discuss before the game even starts. It makes your life so much easier if you limit the things that need to be commed in game. So outside of scrims or matches, you should discuss things that will make in-game comms easier. Things like, when we are playing dive, we should all set up here after one team fight. Or, when we push forward, this player should stand on payload. This means that after the fight, the team can focus on ult tracking and fight planning. Before a game, ideally every player should know whose job it is to scout, whose job it is to push payload, where you set up, where you push back to if you call to retreat on different maps, what each hero's role is in the composition, how you play against specific comps, what angles you should take, and when, what defensive ults you should use against specific comps. I could literally go on for hours. If you are on a new team, you don't need to panic. Most of this can be covered during VOD reviews over a long period of time. I cannot reiterate enough, however, if you don't talk outside of games about these things, your comms will never become clean. It will turn a call that could be, let's set up and then use bomb and primal, to trace a call when you're in position. Diva, come over here, I need you to DM me when I go in. I'm going to look to primal their backline. When I do, use bomb and everyone go aggressively at their tanks. In the second example, everybody on the team needed to be told exactly what they need to do. In the first example, that was all discussed before the game. This can get super complicated. The more your team are intelligent players who understand the meta, the more you discuss plans in VODs, the less you need to comm and the better your team will be. This is what Overwatch teams are about, and it's how you improve. So many teams just scrim without doing this, which not only makes their comms a mess, but stops them from improving. Different types of calling. First, let's talk about ult tracking. This is when you tell your team what ultimates you expect the other team to have or are close to having. This is usually the main support, but could be off tank or main tank. Shot calling. This is the in-game leader's job, or the IGL. They are generally in charge of large amounts of communication, such as win conditions, pathing, rotations, disengagements and engagements, counter switching, calling winnable or losable fights, fight planning, whatever. But these roles could be absorbed by somebody else in the team. This could be the main tank or the main support, and it could be the same person as the ult tracker. Target calling. This is the person who calls targets for the rest of the team to focus. This is usually the main tank, but it can be a DPS or off tank who does a lot of damage, or a Zen who can just call who he's discording. Scouting. This is when someone looks out for what the enemy team is doing. What pathing are they using? If they are changing heroes or splitting up. This can be Pharah, Sombra, Tracer, Diva, Lucio, Echo, anyone with mobility. The person who does this is heavily dependent on your composition. Info calling. Everybody usually calls the things that they see. This could be the position of a flanking enemy, when the enemy uses their abilities, when someone is low, just anything that is relevant to the team. Echo calling. This is when everybody confirms that they are on the same target as the target caller. This is everybody's responsibility and reassures the team that everybody is targeting the same hero. Ability and ultimate calling. Everybody should be calling their abilities, wall, nades and every ultimate in the game. There's no reason why you can't tell your team that you are about to blade, or you're about to grab, or you're about to wall off a choke. This is just about letting your team know what you are doing so they can react accordingly. And then last up, fight status. Someone who calls if we are up 2, down 1, etc. Some teams have someone specifically to call out the status of the kill feed. This will help the shot caller decide if the fight is winnable or losable and stop people wasting ultimates on lost fights. This could be anyone on the team, preferably someone with less comm responsibility mid-fight and less mechanical responsibility. So now let's look at a timeline of what calls should be made in game. So as soon as the fight is over, you should have the Ult Tracker Ult Tracking. So first, the Ult Tracker should be telling the team what ults the enemy team have or are close to. At the same time, the scout should be scouting, and then after the ult tracking is done with that, the scout can tell the team where the enemy is coming from. Then, the shot caller can call out both teams' win conditions, and can use the previous information to come up with a fight plan. They should then tell the team what pathing to use, and finally, an engagement call should happen. At this point, the fight starts and comms become a little bit easier, and the focus goes away from the shot caller and onto the target caller. The target caller should be calling targets, the echo calling should happen, ability and ultimate calling should happen, people should be info calling, just calling out everything that they seems necessary, and a winnable, losable call should happen if that is relevant. And then there is possibly a disengagement call might happen. And finally, if the fight is finished, then you should discuss counter switching and go back to step 1 of ult tracking. Now let's look at each type of calling in a bit more detail. Ult tracking. Tracking ults isn't easy and can require a lot of practice. A good ult tracker will start ult tracking immediately after the fight. This is the first thing that should be called, and the earlier you do it, the more time the rest of your team have to make calls. The only time you might not want to do this as soon as the fight is finished is if your shot caller needs to call something urgently, like to push forward or swap heroes. But in general, if you spend ages ult tracking, then it's going to rush your shot caller and you might run out of time and run into the fight with no idea what the plan is. It's not a bad idea to time your ult tracking and aim to finish it in 5 to 10 seconds, after the fight is won or lost. It is worth remembering that the ult tracker might not know if an ability was used. It's fine to ask your team, and it's fine for your team to correct you. If you want to improve at ult tracking, it's not a bad idea to get your coach to spectate a game and spot what heroes you are overestimating their ult charge and what heroes you are underestimating. You could also cover up the ult charge on Scrim replays or Overwatch League matches and try to guess. It's something that the more you practice, the better at it you will get. It also helps to try out different heroes to get an idea of how much ult charge different heroes get in different circumstances. For example, you might want to know how much ult charge Ryan usually gets after fire striking an entire team. Shot calling involves a lot of different things. Shot calling requires you to have a massive brain. It's usually given to a hero who isn't mechanically demanding, like a main tank or main support. They have multiple things that they need to communicate. For example, win conditions. So ideally, after the ult tracking, your shot caller wants to tell your team what the enemy team's win condition is. This might be a combo, like they are looking to bomb shatter, or it could be that they are going to look to hack Zen and then EMP. And you also want to talk about what your win condition is. And it's important that your win condition trumps their win condition. Let's look at an example. Let's say our team has a Winston, Zarya, Genji, Tracer, Zen and an Ana, and the enemy team has a Reinhardt, Zarya, Sombra, Doomfist, Lucio and also an Ana. A lot of teams' shot callers will say, let's use Nanoblade next fight. This gives the team a win condition, which is good, but it's also important that you tell your team what the enemy team's win condition is. In this example, the shot caller might say that the enemy team's win condition is EMP Shatter. This might make our team decide not to use Nanoblade because it could be countered using EMP, and instead keep Zen split from the team and look to use Grav Nade as your win condition. This is good because it gives you a win condition that trumps their win condition. The best shot callers will know that the enemy team know that you have Grav Nade, and so might play slow and split to give Lucio a chance to farm beat. So your shot caller might call to push aggressively and take the fight as early as possible. It's also important, if you want to be the best shot caller you can be, that you consider what ultimates you need for the next fight. So your plan could be to use Zen ult to push aggressively into the enemy team, but then you wouldn't have Transcendence for either EMP or Grav, which would lose you quite possibly the next 2 fights. You have to look out though to keep your calls simple and not to micromanage your team. The shot caller is also probably in charge of pathing. The shot caller needs to decide how they're going to approach the enemy and where they're going to set up. This should take into account the scouting that your team has done and what comp the enemy team is running. For example, if you are running Brawl against Spam, you are probably going to look for pathing that will minimise the spam that you'll take on rotations. Whereas if you're playing Brawl versus Brawl, then you might want to take a longer route to take the high ground. It's better the earlier you tell people where you are rotating, and if you follow it with 3-2-1, then everyone will know exactly what they're doing and when. It will make your rotations extremely smooth. It should be noted, however, that this is less important in dive comps where everybody is playing independently from each other. Disengagement and engagements is usually the shot caller's job as well, unless you have a Lucio and the Lucio isn't your shot caller. The reason Lucio is almost always the one that calls engagement and disengagement when he's in a team is because his speed boost directly affects when you can commit into the enemy and when you can back up. So Lucio will be like, I'm speeding you in, or I'm speeding you out. Either way, it's important that you will have someone who tells the team when you're backing up and when you're going in, so that everyone is on the same page. Again, if you call 3-2-1 on engagements, then it will make it a lot smoother. I cannot stress that enough. Counter switching is also usually the shot caller's job. It doesn't have to be, but it commonly is. When you see the enemy composition or they change comp, then it's common for your team to change a hero to get a better composition compared to the enemy team. Obviously, when you switch hero, you lose ultimate charge, so it is unlikely, unless it's at the beginning of a map, that you'll change the entire team. The shot caller should know what heroes counter specific comps and when it's worth changing those heroes. Winnable and losable calls is also another responsibility of the shot caller. Once a fight is lost, someone needs to be in charge to tell the team to die on cart or back up. The team should be aiming to win the fight unless the shot caller tells the team that the fight is lost. This will keep everybody on the same wavelength and avoid half the team committing and half the team backing right off. Shot callers also need to fight plan. This is the main thing that people think about when it comes to shot calling. You need to take the win conditions, the ult tracking, the scouting, with the knowledge that you have about the game, and then decide what ults you need to use and how you want to fight. Do you want 2 short fights or 1 long fight? Do you need to bait ults or force abilities? Maybe you want to dry fight. Do you want to play slow or fast? You need to summarize quickly what you want to do and make sure not to micromanage your team, because that will frustrate your team and make your life a lot harder. So that's it for the shot caller. Now let's have a look at the target caller. At every moment in a team fight, everyone on the team should know who on the enemy team they are meant to be focusing. This is the job of the target caller. This could be a Reinhardt because he has the shortest range and worst visibility on the team, meaning he's unlikely to be able to contribute to many other targets. It could also be a high damage dealing character like a Zarya, Hanzo or Junkrat, because you really need to be targeting who they are targeting to have much of an impact. And lastly, it could be a Zen, because if everybody didn't target the discorded target, then that would be kinda silly. But who exactly should you target? Ideally you want to target people who are the easiest to kill first, because their time to kill will be less. You also want to target enemies depending on their win condition. If their win condition is to use Grav Dragons, then it makes Zarya a very juicy target. You also want to target an enemy who's used their defensive abilities, like an Ana with no sleep dart or nade, a Moira with no fade, or Zarya with no bubbles, Ryan with no shield, etc. Again, because their time to kill will be less. It is also favourable to target larger immobile heroes because they are much easier to hit. The time to kill a Lucio wall riding around point or a Tracer blinking randomly nearby is usually much larger than it is to burn down a Winston. It's not possible to rank what's the most important thing to look for in a target because it's very situational, but target calling is about judging the time to kill and the importance of the target and coming to a conclusion that is definite and decisive. Remember though, targeting someone is always better than targeting nobody at all. You also need to understand that sometimes it's important to switch to a different enemy. In an ideal situation, you want to call one target and for them to get melted down and killed before you move on to the next one. However, sometimes that's not the case, and sometimes you need to change target because an enemy has managed to escape or is in a position which is safe for them. You want to avoid a situation though where you change targets too often without killing them. If you notice you are, it's probably poor target focus or a target caller who is getting way too excited. That's target calling. Now I want to talk about echo calling. Echo calling is called a lot of different things. Sometimes it comes under Korean comms or repeat calling, but it basically means that you repeat what the target caller is saying. It keeps comms hype and reassures the target caller that you are all shooting the same enemy. It also makes it much less likely that you're going to ignore the target caller, which is especially important for new teams or low SR teams. Echo calling doesn't have to be just repeating the character's name, you can also add more info. So a shot caller might say Zarya on point, Zarya, 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 and then somebody else might say Zarya no personal, or someone might say Zarya's low. All of this tells not only the target caller that you are shooting the same target as they are, but it also adds extra information for the rest of your team. It's often the case, however, that teams scream at the top of their lungs the target which they are focusing, and this works great for some teams, but you have to be aware that it makes it very hard for important things to be called. You might all be targeting Zarya, but then your Ana is getting attacked by a Tracer and wants peel, then it's important that the rest of your team isn't speaking too loudly that Ana cannot be heard. Next I want to talk about scouting. This can be done by a D.Va, Pharah, Lucio, Echo, Tracer, Sombra, whatever, but the rest of your team can also help. The most important thing about scouting is to find the pathing of the enemy and to do that as soon as possible. You also want to be able to tell if they're doing anything extremely cheeky, setting anybody up in a flanking position, trying to pincer you, or whatnot. The positioning of your team is highly dependent on where the enemy is coming from. If you know where the enemy team is coming from, then you can trap them at a specific choke or take high ground and position for set play. The scout on your team also needs to call if the enemy is playing split or if they are changing heroes. You also want your team, all 6 of them, to be info calling. Everybody on your team should call out what they see, because 6 eyes on your team are better than 1, and your shot caller cannot see everything on the map. Things that you might want to call are the position of an enemy, like a Tracer flanking or the position of a Widowmaker. Enemy ability usages, like Moira no fade or Tracer no recall. Enemy's health, like Zen's 1 or Ryan's low. And also random things like Zarya's high charge or Mercy's rezzing. These things are then fed to the target caller, who can use them to choose targets. Now let's talk about ability or ultimate calling. This is one of my biggest pet peeves on Overwatch teams, and I cannot understand why people find it so hard, but evidently they do. Calling when you are going to use an ultimate or key ability before you use it helps your team so much. Like a lot. If you tell your team, I am walling choke, then your team is ready to push into that wall. If you tell your team, I'm going to grab in 3, 2, 1, then everybody will be ready to push into that grav. Things like Anna's anti-nades, Maze walls, Lucia's speed amp, Zoe bubbles, Ryan's shield health, or any ultimate in the game should all be called so that your team can act accordingly. Similarly, if you do not have an ability like Zoe bubble or Lucia amp, when your team thinks that you do have it, then you should let them know what the cooldown is. Now let's talk about fight status. It's a highly optional comm role, but a lot of teams have someone specifically set up to tell the team if they are 1 down, 2 up, etc. so that the entire team knows if they are winning or losing the fight. If you do that, then it will help your team waste less ultimates on lost fights, or know when they need to pop their ultimate to turn the fight. You can literally practice this in quick play, and it can be a role for absolutely anybody on your team. Probably stick the job to somebody who doesn't have a large comm role though. But how do you implement this into your team? This video has focused on what most teams have as their comm structure and what most coaches, myself included, recommend. It should be important to note, however, that every team is different. Some very successful teams do very well with one shot caller that does absolutely everything, and even possibly micromanages their team. Some teams might have a DPS who loves to shot call, and whilst it's not optimal, if they are by far the best shot caller on your team and it works for you, then great. In the end, most teams' goals is to have fun, so don't feel the need to copy absolutely everything that I've just said, just do what suits your team. It is, however, worth giving everyone an explicit role on your team. Create a spreadsheet with what you expect everyone on your team to communicate when they scrim. If someone is bad at something, then give them an exercise to practice or give the role to someone else. It's important to understand though that communication is really difficult for some people, especially new teams with players with very little team experience. It's definitely something that can take a lot of time and patience to improve at. It's also worth noting that some people in Overwatch have a wide range of reasons that they might not be comfortable with talking a lot in comms. It might be because they don't speak the team's language very well, or that they lack confidence, or they might be self-conscious of their voice. They might feel intimidated by the unfamiliar atmosphere. The best thing in this case, in my opinion, is to try and make them feel as comfortable as possible in the team environment. Organise some fun events outside of Overwatch where they can get to know each other and the players can get used to talking to each other. My favourite exercise I've done before is to get someone to read a story in Discord to the rest of the team before a scrim to get them in a talkative mood. Not gonna lie though, didn't work very well. Anyway, thank you for watching this video and I'll see you next time.